fundraising, peer-to-peer fundraising, and more. We integrate with so many CRMs, so if you think that Qgiv could benefit your organization, I encourage you to reach out and learn a bit more. Okay, I'm really excited to introduce you all to Cherian. He is a certified fundraising executive, chartered advisor in philanthropy, and an AFP master trainer. He is the founder of the Nonprofit Operating System, an AI tool for fundraisers, and has spent more than 25 years working as a frontline fundraiser. I'm really thrilled to turn the mic over to Cherian so we can dive into today's content.
Thanks so much, Wendy, and thank you all for being here. I'm thrilled to be here and talk about a subject that really excites me. As Wendy mentioned, it sort of seems like magic. We're going to demystify this a little bit, but the important thing is that when I thought about, in particular, about donor psychology and how our donors interacted with our organization, I really wanted to deep dive into this. And so in addition to being a frontline fundraiser for about 25 years, I started taking classes in behavioral economics and to understand what drives people and what drives their decision making. So a lot of what I'm going to share with you has to do with what we've discovered about general behavior of people, because donors don't have a different psychology than the rest of us, but also what we have tested and found from actual donor experiences. So you'll merge all of those together. As Wendy mentioned, this webinar is being recorded and you will get the slide deck. So don't feel like you've got to sit there with your phone and take pictures or whatnot. We are also going to ask you to jump into the chat real quick and get those neurons firing. So I'm going to show you a list of words, and I want you to spend about 10 seconds just looking at this list of words. Okay, hopefully you've had a moment to kind of digest all of that. Now, think about the words that you saw. What are all the words that you can remember? And here's what I want you to just indicate in the chat. How many people have bed on their list? Go ahead and hit Y or yep. Thanks, Jennifer. Lots of Y's here. Yep, got great. How about dream? How many people have dream on their list? Somebody spelled, Jennifer says no, it was misspelled. Yep, Nicole, sorry. But it's on your list. Great. How about corn dog? Is corn dog on your list? Yep, some little mixed bag there. Yep, great. And then sleep, is sleep on your list? Lots of Y's there, lots of yeses there. Almost all yeses for that one. Great. And then snore, is snore on your list? Some no's there, some few more no's, some Y's. Okay, so a little bit more of a mixed bag there. So I'm going to share with you how I basically affected your brain in this moment very quickly. Bed is on your list because it was the first thing on the list, if it was on your list. Not always going to be universal, of course, right? But the psychological principle at play here is what's called the primacy effect. You remember the first thing that you see, it sticks in your mind as the thing that that you saw first, and so that's on your list. Many of you had dream on your list because it's of what's called the Zeigarnik effect. You saw that it was misspelled and your brain needed to fix that. And so it was important to you in your head to address that issue. Corn dog might have been on your list because it was the one thing that was very different from all the other things on the list. It's called the contrast effect. And it was the, one of these things is not like the other, right? Snore might be on your list because there were several words that sounded like snore. And one of the things that we do when we look at a list is sort of mentally read them and we sound them out. And you hear words that sound like snore. And so those are on your list because of the spacing effect. Those words were in different places on the list. And then many of you, almost universal, not sure because of the chat function, but many of you had sleep on your list. But here's the thing. Sleep wasn't on your list. Or maybe it was on your list, but it wasn't on this list. And so what's interesting about these kinds of studies is that approximately half of the people that we do these studies with engage in what is considered false recall. It's really fascinating that we'll ask people, was sleep on your list? I actually did this a a couple of days ago in a live audience, and I asked people, like, how sure are you that this was on the list? And we had people who were very, very certain. Yep, sleep was on the list. 10 out of 10, absolutely certain sleep was on the list. And of course, it's not on the list, but because all of the other words tended to think about, or it tended to point to the idea of sleep, your brain believed that the word sleep is there. And this isn't the only version of this kind of situation, of this kind of study. There are incredible videos of people who are watching, for example, like a car crash, and a police officer will just change, as Jennifer mentions in the chat here, these semantic networks and these priming effects, these little things that change how we think about the world around us. And just by how the police officer interacts with the person, the words that they choose, people will swear that they saw one thing, and in fact, they did not see that thing, or they saw it very differently from another group. So it's important to remember that while we're not trying to necessarily have our donors engage in false recall, we are fundamentally not rational. And I had a chance to study with Dan Ariely at Duke and his group called Irrational Labs. And I think it's important to remember what Dan says about this principle. We usually think of ourselves as rational beings, that we have control over the decisions that we make, and that we're data-driven deciders. But really, perception has much more to do with our desires, how we want to view ourselves, than with reality. Ultimately, you, as we've just sort of proven here today, are not rational, or as Dan says, we are predictably irrational, and so are your donors. So as we go through this presentation, I hope that you learn something. I hope there's something where you say, now some of you I know like are well versed in this this strategy, or this information in donor psychology. So for you, I hope we have tactical takeaways that you can use to put into your fundraising practice today. For everyone, I hope there's something that you learn where you say, oh, I didn't think of that before. Here's how I can use this in a new and different way. And ultimately, something that is usable in your organization immediately, today, tomorrow, whenever you're watching this recording, if you're watching it separately. So a reminder that while your donors are not rational, they're predictably irrational, I want to kind of level set and say this is not to be used in a way to manipulate your donors into getting them to do something that they wouldn't already do. These are simple approaches to nudging people towards what they would already want to do. They already want to be generous people, to be people who have an impact on the community. And so the two things that I want you to remember from this slide and this idea is, first of all, we're never going to convince someone who doesn't care about your cause to suddenly care about your cause. We're trying to talk to someone who is on the margin of, are they ready to make a decision now? Are they ready to make a decision in a more generous way? And can we overcome their predispositions to do something today or do something in a more generous way? And then ultimately, how can we help them as fundraisers become the people that they already want to be? To lean into that. So the example that I would say is, we're not sort of trying to pry open a door that's been sealed shut. We're helping a donor or a volunteer to walk through a door that they already want to walk through. So we're showing them how to do that. So hopefully that's helpful as we kind of think through that. But these are not new principles. There's a lot of newfangled science around this. But David Ogilvy, one of the kind of godfathers, grandfathers, whatever of marketing, said that people don't think what they feel, they don't say what they think, and they don't do what they say. And this is very true for us individually, for our donors. I'm sure you've seen this multiple times before, where donors will say one thing and do the other, and they just can't necessarily articulate why they do what they do. So in terms of what we're going to cover today, I want to talk about how what we engage in is what I call random acts of fundraising. We're not strategic about some of the things that we do, and myself included. And then how do we implement these sorts of psychological principles into tactical year-end giving strategies? And that's what hopefully many of you were drawn to, is how do we take this and leverage it for better end of year giving outcomes? Then we'll talk about what do we do to optimize those pieces. And then at the end, we'll talk about your questions as well. Feel free to continue to jump in the chat and Q&A. We'll have several examples here that I'll ask you to kind of engage with in a moment. So let's talk about what I mean by random acts of fundraising. I'm a big fan of Sun Tzu and this idea that strategy without tactics is the slowest route to victory, but tactics without strategy is the noise before defeat. And a lot of the things that we see out there in the world are these very tactical notions. We should put out fundraising appeals in this way. We should, do things kind of mechanically to try and get our donors to give, but it doesn't fit within an overarching strategy. What happens well before they see an appeal? What happens after they see an appeal? How do all of these pieces work together to get those tactics to succeed? And so there's nothing wrong. I've done this 100, maybe 1,000 times before, of just sort of focusing on tactics, getting appeals out, and just not thinking through what does that overall strategy look like. But my hope is at the end of this session, you'll be saying, oh, I see what I can do now to help get to that point in the future. One of the biggest barriers, however, is what I call the highest paid person's opinion. We share the science, we share the psychology of donors, we share best practices and the actual templates that you'll receive. And someone says, I wouldn't give to that. That doesn't resonate with me. The important thing that I want you to be armed with is that CEO, that executive director, the board member, whoever it might be, who's engaging in the HIPPO syndrome, the highest paid person's opinion syndrome, is not your target market, is not the person or persons that you're trying to appeal to. And they're cognitively biased because they have a considerable amount of insider information. At several of the organizations that I'd work with, people from the program team or the education team will say, donors need to know this about what we do. And in reality, they don't actually need to know all of the details of what you do. They need to have a basic understanding of why this is important to them and how it will have an impact. But going into a lot of data and details, especially in an appeal letter, is not going to be generally successful. So the other barrier is what you all probably are aware of, this copycat syndrome. How many times, don't feel like you need to put this in the chat, but how many times have you been in a board meeting or in an executive team meeting where they say, that other nonprofit across the street, across town, did this cool thing, we should do this exact same thing. And the interesting kind of phenomenon that's happening here is that we see some portion of what has been successful somewhere else, and we want to replicate that success, but our organization does not have the same DNA, does not have the exact same resource base or donor base or volunteer base as that organization. We don't know what went into that organization's strategy to deploy that. So we're sort of seeing one piece of that, and the example of someone who's unable to see, and they're touching one part of an elephant and kind of thinking about it from what that could be. So I want to caution you against the copycat syndrome, because what works in one organization does not necessarily work in another. The other thing that you should be aware of, and one thing that's important to me personally, is not that I come from a place of, oh, I'm an expert, I've done this a long time, but rather, how can you as a fundraiser, as a nonprofit professional, follow the data and the research to help you make an informed decision? So on many of these slides, which you'll get later, you can follow the research to understand where I'm coming from when it comes to this conclusion. The key element here is the idea, the myth, that knowledge is power. And that if we present people with enough information, they will make a decision that we want them to do. For example, make a donation or volunteer for our organization. This is simply false. The data, and there's one study here on this slide, but there's quite a bit of data out there. In fact, I would say the preponderance of data out there that says the more information that someone has, the less likely they are to make the decision that you want them to make, whether it's because they have analysis paralysis or some other reason that's more nuanced. So when it comes to the idea of knowledge is power, remember that your donors are fundamentally predictably irrational. They're making decisions based upon gut and emotion, just like we all are. We're not, this is not just them, this is also all of us. And when we have too much information, we shrink back. We feel like, oh, I don't know if I have the right information. I don't know if I have enough information. And as a result, I end up not making the decision or delaying the decision. And here's the important thing, just in case you fall asleep during this webinar. The biggest enemy to any sort of giving strategy is not no, but not now. It's not no, it's not now. Meaning, getting a no from a fundraising appeal, I consider great information, because if someone doesn't care about the cause or they don't care about the program that we're fundraising for, that's beautiful information for me to have. I know now how to sort my priorities. The biggest enemy is not now, meaning I can do that later. I don't have to do that today. So our goal is to transform the not now into, yes, I want to solve this problem today. Herbert Simon says the same thing in saying a wealth of information creates a poverty of attention. So for those of you that have really complicated websites or really complicated giving forms, this is just hopefully a helpful reminder that your donors are not necessarily thinking through that. And especially in the digital age that we all live in, people skim information, they look for highlights, and if we don't have a clear pathway for people to give, whether it's through direct mail or through online giving tools, that they will be hesitant to give. They will decide not to make that decision because a lot of things are coming at them at the same time. And as I mentioned before, one of the kind of universal truths that we know today is that people don't know what motivates them. They will say that they care about a certain thing, but their reason for caring about that is beyond their full understanding. There are other reasons why they make a decision. And again, you can follow that research, but it's really universally available. There's lots of great books and resources out there around this particular aspect of what drives people's decision. Now, this is an ad for Listerine, but I think it is a great example of what most of our fundraising appeals look like. They're what's called System 2 ads. And the System 2 thinking is very kind of rational, very data-driven, where we say, here are all the good reasons to make a gift to our organization. You'll see the hero image and headline equally effective every day. So it's trying to give you these data points, and the idea here is not that you read the ad, but you can very clearly see, does this inspire me to try Listerine? Not really, right? But this is an advertisement that's real, that has been used for Listerine in particular. Would this convince me? Probably not. So Listerine created a separate ad strategy called a System 1 ad. This is not data driven. This is designed to kind of follow your gut, to follow your emotions, to make you imagine. And you'll see here the tagline is, what will go through your mouth today? And you'll see kind of pictures of food, a pen, right? All these little things that now you think of, what did go through my mouth today? And do I need to use Listerine? This is what you might aim for, especially in broad-based appeals to people who don't necessarily know the nuances of your organization. Focusing on more of those emotional gut reactions leans into the donor psychology to drive their ability to understand what it is that your organization does, why that cause resonates with them already. Another kind of component that's important to remember is that people are drawn to nostalgia, to what their memories of your cause area means to them. So as I mentioned before, donors are not necessarily going to be convinced if they're opposed to your cause area. I know it's hard to kind of imagine what that looks like. Who would hate animals or the arts or education or healthcare, right? But it may not be top priority for them. It may be important in the grand scheme of things that that they care about, but is it one of their top giving areas, one of their top philanthropic priorities? And for most people, what drives their decision is the issue of memory, of nostalgia. What brings them back to something that they care about? And these are examples of top TV shows and movies that are really successful because they remind people, particularly people of my generation, of a time when these things really mattered to them, a thing that they connect in their brains around those, and they want to see how the story ends. And so their memories drive decision making. So one example of how I would use this in fundraising, I worked for a performing arts organization in the past, and one of the things that we would talk about with donors is what kind of shows they would like, what kind of shows they went to and whatnot. We actually switched up that model to say, who took you to your first performance? The reason why we asked that was because we didn't necessarily want them to be tied just to the performance, just to the show that they they went to the first time. That might have been a good or bad experience, but the person that took them to their first show, probably someone that's important to them, probably someone they have warm feelings about. And now we have this connection to that story, and we're able to tease out that story to be able to build out that relationship in a more meaningful way. One of the last issues that I want you to be aware of as you think through these issues is that is the kind of inclination to jump to what you all are familiar with, the shiny object syndrome. We're working on a strategy, and then we see some newfangled technology, some newfangled idea, and we jump to that new idea because we are inclined to believe that something new is also something better. We'll unpack this more for donors in a moment, but what I would encourage you to do is stay the course in almost all circumstances, to know that just because it's new does not mean it's better. And as you jump between different ideas and different strategies, you end up losing momentum. So as you're thinking through that, be skeptical of the advice, the talking heads that are out there that talk about, this is the new thing that you should be doing. This is the thing that you should be doing that you haven't done before. You're leaving money on the table. In reality, the core best practices that we've known for generations when it comes to nonprofit fundraising are still true today, even with digital media, digital strategies. Those core relationship building techniques, those core authentic relationships with donors is really what will drive decision making for your organization, for donors' generosity. So be skeptical of people who tell you differently, who tell you you're not doing the right things. I would guess that all of you have a lived experience and a learned experience that are critical to your success, and you should embrace what you know and use that knowledge, that skill set, that expertise to build upon. And everything that we're going to talk about now in terms of actual tactical implementation of these psychological principles draws upon your experience and expertise. It's not to say do something totally different. So this is more of a buffet approach. Lean into what works and less into kind of what's out there and what's different. Ultimately, if someone says that they know better than you, if they say they knew better than you, I want you to just kind of be wary of that. This is not really, something where, my coach says you shouldn't be a should head and say, this person should do this. You know your organization's DNA, you know your donors and volunteers makeup. So be mindful of that as we move into the kind of tactical application. As a high level concept, what I want you to remember, as I said before, historical kind of tried and true principles. This is from Aristotle. We are what we repeatedly do, meaning that excellence is not an act, but a habit. It is not an act, not an isolated event. It is what we repeatedly do. So everything that we talk about with our donors, with our volunteers, with our community has everything to do with how we consistently show up in those spaces. What is the things that we talk about, and how is that essentially coaching our donors, our stakeholders to believe certain things about our organization, about who we are, what our values are, what we stand for. So we think about giving in terms of 3 questions, but 4 questions. They're the ideas or the principles around, you have money, it's a good cause, we're good at it, and we need money. Those are the types of the statements that we think in our head, and we ask the question, do you have money? Can we prove to you that it's a good cause? Can we demonstrate that we're good at it? And can we establish that we need money? What your donors are thinking, based upon what I've just shared with you, is why should I give it all? Why should I give money or time to a nonprofit, to a philanthropic cause at all? Not everyone is there. It's important to remember that not everyone is in that mindset. And I think one of the things that's scary right now is that that trend might be shifting, and we need to be cautious of that. So if they say, I should give, I should be philanthropic with my time or my treasure, why should I give to you, to your organization, to this cause? What is it about your cause and your organization that addresses that cause, that says, I should give to you instead of some other organization, some other cause area? Why should I give to you? And then the last thing to remember that's super, super important. Why should I give now? Remember, the enemy is not now, is not no, it is not now. So if they don't make the decision to give now, the likelihood of them making a decision later is even less, especially when it comes to the, sort of the false urgency of end of year. Many people give during that time. Nationally, it's some 30% of all giving happens in the month of December, but that's not true for every individual. So why should they give now as opposed to January or next spring? What makes them make that decision today? So let's talk about getting ready for year-end giving. We're in October now, if you're here with me live. And so what are the things that I can do now to get to where we want to be in November, December? Some of this has already passed. So this is information for next year as you're thinking about that, but we'll get into some strategies you could still do, but you might need to cram it in. So before we do that, I'm going to prime you again. I want to demonstrate this principle very quickly. So if your last name begins with A through L, I want you to just close your eyes or look away from the screen. You can check your email for a minute or something like that. So I'm going to give you just 2 seconds to do that. And everybody else, M through Z, I'm going to ask you to just look at the screen. And I'm not going to read this out loud because our colleagues are going to have their eyes closed. So remember, this is the question that I want you to answer if your eyes are open or you're on the screen. And I just want you to come up with a number, okay? And send your guess now in, send an actual number, if you will, the number in the chat. That's totally fine. All right, so our colleagues then that had their eyes closed or were checking email, just pause for a moment, go ahead and open your eyes. And then here's so these are the folks that are last name begins with M through Z. I want you to answer this question. And for those of you who have already seen the question, just don't mention in the chat what you have seen. And so for those of you who are now having your eyes open, go ahead and answer your question, or go ahead and answer the question, more or less than 1,000, and send in your guess now. Go ahead and put it in the, put a number in the chat, if you will. Go ahead and put a number in the chat here as well. So as for those of you who are in the chat, if you're watching the chat, you can see what you, especially if you've seen the first version, you know exactly what's happening here. And I want to kind of open up the curtain and show you what happened in the first group. I'm going to just scroll back. In the first group, we said, is the number of pieces more or less than 100? And if you scroll up to the chat, you will see a wide variety of numbers, but many of them less than 100. Small numbers like 8, I saw 8, I saw 11, and whatnot. And then for folks that had the primed number of 1,000, you'll see if you scroll up to the chat, for example, Roxanne said 1,200. Rebecca said 1,520. James said 1,000. So you'll see, lots of examples here of numbers that are quite a bit larger. And so the real answer is that nonprofit mail is 92 versus 454 marketing mail pieces per year. And there's a source site there for you. But just with that framing, you all had very, very different numbers based upon what you saw. So how do we think about that? And what's an example of that framing piece and of these other psychological principles when it comes to actual direct mail pieces? So some colleagues in the UK actually tested this, and what we're going to look at is some variations on an example here that actually tremendously increased the results of this fundraising appeal. So this is on the right side of your screen is the example of a direct mail piece that went out. And what I want you to vote on is which version you think created the greatest lift in performance, meaning fundraising performance, actual dollars raised. So the first one is labor illusion, meaning we put a thing on the envelope that said hand delivered by your local volunteer. It looked like someone worked on this piece it was more personal because of that. So if you think it's labor illusion, put 1. You can wait until we're done to put in that number. 2 is the idea of scarcity, that it drives urgency. You'll see here, we're collecting donations this week only this week. That's the only time we're asking for gifts. That's number 2. 3 is cognitive ease. This is the idea that we're telling them that it's an appeal. We're asking for money. We're being straight up with that. And so they don't have to go through the work of, is this information or is this an appeal? That's number 3. Number 4 is all they did was switch the orientation of the envelope. This is number 4, where they took it from kind of horizontal and made it vertical. So that's number 4. Number 5 is drawing attention to gift aid. So it says boost your donation by 25%. Your gift will be increased a bit because of that, and that's number 5. And then last is cost signaling. So what's a weird psychological principle, but is actually proven to be true, is that if we feel something heavy in our mail, we believe that it actually has more weight, literally and figuratively, in our world. And so that's number 6, is that the paper was thicker, so it had more heft. So lots of people on 5, some 2s in there. So that would be scarcity and salience, drawing attention to gift aid. Couple of 1s. Great. So ready for the answer? I don't see anyone doing, I didn't see anybody putting in 4. Yep, I don't see anybody putting in 4. The answer was 4. So when we switch the orientation of the mail piece, it increased the lift by 17%. Now, to be clear, no one was necessarily wrong here. The control created a 34% or 34% ROI, and then you'll see here the different variations. I can tell you that there's a lot of reasons that go into this. One piece of that, if you think about how your mail is delivered, and when you look at your mail, a lot of your mail is horizontal. So when something is vertical, it sort of sticks out in your hand, and your mail is opened over your recycling bin or your trash. And so if something sticks out, in order to read it, you have to shift it. That may have an effect on open rates and whatnot. Lots of ideas on why this might happen. Let me be clear on one very important thing before everybody runs to their direct mail agency and say, hey, we need to change our orientation. This is N equals 1, meaning this is one version of one appeal that was tested with a lot of donors, of course. So it is a data point, but it's, as I said before, it is not necessarily going to work in your case. So be thoughtful of how you implement this, or if you implement this at all. Lots of things that you all suggested as being successful will make a difference in your lift rate. So be mindful of that as you think about, what do we deploy? What I would suggest to you is that testing is everything, right? Testing and experimenting with these different psychological principles, these drivers of nudges, can help you optimize within your organization around those lift rates. So be thoughtful of what that looks like as you do this. I would hate for anybody to say, oh, vertical orientation makes a difference. Everybody does that. I think part of that would be sort of a self-negating prophecy, because if everyone switched to vertical, then it wouldn't work in the same way, right? So I love the work of Tamsin Webster. I want you to now start thinking about, what does that messaging look like, not just on the outside of the envelope, but what does it look like from the messaging itself? And it's important to remember that what everyone wants to hear is that they are smart, capable, and good people. And if you recommend a strategy to them that reinforces their smartness, their capableness, their goodness, they will be inclined to make those decisions. So what we're going to go through some kind of specific strategies when it comes to these pieces, and then get into like literally how I've used this. So identity focused messaging is important. If you're talking to all of your stakeholders at once, I hope you're not, but if you are, the thing that you're doing is saying to someone who has generously contributed to your organization that they're just the same as anyone else out there who doesn't have a stake in your organization. So remember that ultimately your messaging should be, people like you do things like this. That's from Seth Godin, and it's really powerful. So someone who's a donor, we want to reinforce to them that this is the norm. This is what people do. People like you do things like this. And we're speaking to donors differently than someone who is not a donor. We're speaking to someone who has been a long-time donor differently than someone who has been a first-time donor. I think our donor retention rates have a lot to do with how we're mentally coaching them through the words that we use. Here's an example, as I said, with the Performing Arts Center that I worked at. We sent them a postcard that says, your generous support contributes to the amazing total amount of money that Tuesday or Wednesday season ticket holders generously provide to preserve and protect the arts. You can see a lot of donor psychology that's going in there. Your generous support, we are labeling them as generous supporters. We're also giving them a priming number. We're giving them something that's pretty big in terms of the number of gifts that are happening, or the amount of money that's happening. We're also being specific to the day of their season ticket, because we want them to see people like you do things like this. Get it? They're Tuesday night subscribers. All the other people in that room are generously supporting. And then that preserve and protect the arts, that sort of salience around that. You'll see some other pieces here, but the thing that I want to draw your attention to with this postcard is this last sentence. Watch for this in your upcoming mail, and thank you for your loyal support and your continued generosity. This is not an appeal. This is a priming piece. This reminds them that they are loyal people, that they are generous. So we just do this simply. For us, this resulted in a significant uptick in how many people responded to end of year giving. For people who were not donors, we spoke to them differently. We did not start with their generosity because they had not been generous to us. We said, Tuesday season ticket holders, just like you, generously supported the arts and arts education. Your fellow Tuesday night season ticket holders have given a significant amount. That's an average gift of $100, whatever it might be, right? And we're specific for every day. Would you consider joining them? Would you consider joining them? People like you, people who sit in the seats next to you. And then notice again, this is still a priming piece. We just want a number in their head, a thought that they're different from everybody else, and they should, hopefully be part of this if they're inclined to do it. Remember, they're not strangers to us. And you'll see again at the bottom, we make this easy by adding a gift and even setting up a convenient payment plan. Watch for this in your upcoming mail, and thank you in advance for considering a gift to support the arts. So this is one thing. And again, you'll have these slides if you want to, beg, borrow, and steal from this, feel free. But what we're doing here is to say, we're going to give you a choice. We're going to give you the ability to make a decision in advance of us asking you for it. And I'm not a huge fan of donor surveys in general, because I think there's a lot of bias, a lot of this irrational stuff that we talk about that goes into donor surveys. But there's an opportunity to use surveys in qualitative information to understand what donors are saying with words, with phrases that resonate with them. So I would encourage you to think about putting out surveys that help you understand how donors think about your organization, not necessarily asking them for preferences, because we know that donors don't know what they're motivated by. So if we can kind of create a mental commitment, they're thinking about making a pledge, they're planning in advance to make a gift. Maybe they're talking to someone else in their house about making that plan, and reinforcing, particularly for those donors, their identity as a donor. How can we reinforce those elements around, you are a donor, this is part of your identity, this is part of who you are? How can we establish that? And as I shared with you before, there's really great research, not just in donor psychology, but in personal, like general psychology, around habit forming. So if we set that goal, if we create a plan, we're more likely to have follow through. So if we say, for example, we want you to set a 2024 giving goal or a multi-year giving goal. That's why pledges working capital campaigns, for example, it does demonstrate an increase in follow through. I should have hyperlinked this, but if you haven't read James Clear's Atomic Habits or BJ Fogg's Tiny Habits, they will help you as a person, they'll help you as a fundraiser, and they'll certainly help your donors as they think about a plan. So for next year, start in September. Create an impact story in September to set yourself up to be top of mind early in the process. Check out my friend Rachel at Small Shop Strategies. She'll walk you through on her website exactly how to create an impact strategy. But if you have not done this before, do something that is, in particular, is omni-channel, is visual, and is storified. You're creating stories that demonstrate your impact. Again, not data driven, but who have you impacted? How have you impacted them? Send that impact story. You could still do this today, but planning in advance for next year, put out that impact story early so that people have you top of mind. My big thesis is that people forget that they were generous to your organization, they forget how much they gave, and they forgot why it was important, and that's what affects future giving. So putting that out in advance reminds people, oh, yeah, this is an organization that I gave to, this is an organization that matters. And again, you could put out something very cheap and cheerful, a donor survey like Google Forms that says, why is this cause important to you? What's more important about this cause? You could ask them if they're considering supporting the organization again, and then you could reformat those responses and send it back to them. This is really kind of critical. And again, you could do this now, but again, for the future, if they're saying out loud in their heads and on the Google form, this cause is important to me, guess what that does? It reinforces to them, this is what is important to them. This is why this is important to them as they're typing it out. Not everyone's going to respond, but those that do are much, much more likely to follow through because they created that self-talk, that self-dialogue that reinforces how important that is. So we're at the end of October now, but I would encourage you, if you're able to do this now in October or even early December, be thoughtful of how you can outreach to them again, thanking them for their gift. This is another part of that omni-channel strategy, hitting them wherever they might be. So leaving them a quick voicemail. You could use volunteers to do this. We had a core group of people, of volunteers we called encouragers, and their job was just to call everyone, and we knew that they were getting a voicemail. So there's a quick template here that, again, you'll have the slides, but hey, my name is Cherian. I'm an AFP board member, simply calling to say thank you for your support of the fundraising profession. And I would call donors to the foundation and just say thank you so much. That's it. We just want you to know how important your loyal support has been. It's a great opportunity for board members as well as volunteers to help with that. If you're able to get people together, consider doing that in advance as well. No program, no ask, serve some food and drinks, just letting people know that this is a group of people who are generous to your organization. If you're doing something virtual, again, do something that might be interesting. Even like a facility tour could be helpful. Even if they don't attend, remember, this is all about kind of priming them. It's all about reinforcing to them, lifting you up as in terms of what they remember, bringing top of mind. As long as they see that email, even if they don't participate, it can make a huge difference in how they respond to that end of year giving. So what do we look for at the actual point of the appeal? All of those things that we do in advance are not appeal driven. They're no ask situations. We're just lifting up what the organization has done, the impact that donors have had, and reminding them that they are donors. So then when we get to the actual appeal part, they are primed and ready. And what I want you to remember is that this is from Irrational Labs, the 3 B's of donor behavior, that there is a behavior that we want them to do, there are barriers to them doing that, and there are benefits to them doing what we want them to do. Far too often, though, we create our own barriers to that process. So one thing to do today, after you're off this webinar, is to secret shop your own organization. What does it take for me to respond to your end of year appeal? For example, I give generously to an organization that requires that I give through a check, and I have to find a stamp and I have to find my checkbook, which is not easy. And these small hassles make my gift every year delayed to that organization. I'm a fundraiser. I know how this works, and I still get challenged by this. If you have a donation website that requires them to do lots of clicks and fill out lots of pieces, is there a way that you can optimize that today? Make a way to make it easier for them to give. Whatever you need to have, you need to have. I get that. But have a friend, have a family member, have your mom go through the process of trying to make a gift. Here's a fun one that I do in person all the time. I'm going to call and try and make a gift on the phone. Do you have any idea how difficult that process is for a lot of organizations? It's tough. And I've done that where I've made live donations in person and tried to, in fact, and it's like 1 in 10 that I'm actually able to get to someone and make a gift easily. A lot of times I end up in voicemail to someone and it's not, I don't end up being able to make the gift on the phone. So be mindful of that. How can I make giving feel really, really good? Immediately, we want feedback. We want something. I'm going to ask you for feedback. Qgiv is going to ask you for feedback on this webinar. They want to know, I want to know, was this helpful to you or was this a waste of time? And your donors are asking the same question. Was this helpful to you? Was this a waste of time? Make it immediate, make it emotional, make it as positive as you can. Spotlight that there are others like this, that there are ways in which you can reinforce that people like them did something like this. They're not off on an island doing something that only they are doing, but others are doing it just like them. Don't forget to prime the right identity. We all have multiple identities. I am a first-generation immigrant. I'm a father. I'm a fundraiser. These are different types of identities, and you all have the same. So let's make sure that we're talking to the right identity, and that will take some work on your part as you're thinking through that. And then make sure that you're emphasizing what is different. It doesn't necessarily need to be something new in your organization, but how many went to get the new iPhone or the new Pixel phone? It's still the same phone, but it's just a little bit different. So at the end of year appeals, we want to make sure that we're highlighting the things that are just slightly different. Ultimately, we want to bundle short-term temptation with long-term benefits. Remember that people are motivated by things that they can complete, that's desirable. If it's longer term away, then it's really hard for us to kind of address that. When it comes to behaviors, don't oversimplify. Sometimes we just think about needing coffee and that's the behavior we want, is getting coffee. In reality, in order for me to get my morning cup of coffee, I had to do a lot of things. So is your behavior them actually picking up the phone, them actually opening the mail, them stopping the scroll and seeing your social media post or opening your email? Those are the behaviors that you want to optimize for. And I'm going to skip over this because it's just a reiteration of amplifying the benefits. We want to focus on what I want this today versus maybe I need this tomorrow. So in November, share a need story. What is this incomplete, like dream, the misspelled dream? What is the incomplete story that the person just has to fix? They have to solve this problem. They want to know how the story ends. And I use the phrase, you might think that this is addressed, that this isn't a problem, but in fact, please consider how you might think about how you might plan to help solve this need. And then maybe Thanksgiving or something like that, send a thanks for giving communication to them, whether by email or by phone. Remember to use that. And then as the finale, the moment you send that email, that direct mail piece, or an omni-channel campaign, remember that they have this decision threshold. And our goal is to move from, should I do this, or how do I do this? How do I make that decision? So we want to increase their commitment by creating the consequence of failing. What happens if I don't do this? What happens if we don't say yes to giving or yes to volunteering? And over time, their intent to do it will decrease, meaning their likelihood of donating, just like the likelihood of responding to a survey after 48 hours is really, really low. So deadline December is what it's all about. Send an example of this is sending a mailed appeal with an email chaser and an associated post. So you send a direct mail piece, it lands on December 15th. On December 15th or 16th, you send an email after that that says, hey, I want to make sure you got my letter. It's in your mailbox, and you can also donate online. We're making it super easy. We send out social media posts on the 15th and 16th that say, hey, check your mail. Hey, this is the opportunity that's out there. Remember, if you are able to send a reminder and during that last week of December, it's short and sweet. It's a reminder, not a new appeal. The deadline is hope-filled. Don't make it desperation mode. We're going to close if you don't give, because that ends up meaning that people just don't, they're not excited about giving. They're worried that this won't go the way that they had hoped. So make it hope-filled and aspirational. Do not send out an appeal if you have not planned for January, meaning make January joyful. Send them an acknowledgement as quickly as possible when they give. Plan for what is coming after the gift. That should be part of something you do well in advance so that you know how you will do that. That is not just a receipt, but it's personalized and prompt so that you're staying top of mind after the giving process. If you need more than those templates, you can try out a tool that I created. Again, you'll get these slides later, but this will help you kind of create some of those thank you notes and other things for you as well. Remember, as you're thinking about donor problems, the problems that the donors have, listen for, I wish I could do more language, whether they send that to you in email or in a personal conversation. Think about how you can solve those problems with them. How can we address the issue that you have, and then demonstrate that their giving has an impact in the world. At the end of the day, use all of these tools to get the next meeting with your donors, to get the opportunity to, as much as possible, meet them face-to-face or over Zoom, engage with them on an individual level to really reinforce their commitment to the organization and see whether they're interested in going to the next level. So I know there's more than 100 different organizations on this call. I want to address as many of the questions that you have. I'm happy to stay a little bit longer if you're able to. But before I do, I want to make sure that you understand the key takeaways from this talk. We are coaching our donors every time we speak to them, every time we engage with them. So are every for-profit, every organization out there in the world is coaching your donors and your stakeholders. So it is important that you are consistently engaging with them and that you are doing so with intentionality, that there is a purpose for those communications in advance, during, and after end of year giving. Above all, abandon those random acts of fundraising that are just scattershot, spray and pray approaches. Be strategic about why you are doing the things that you are doing. And I want to now open it up to questions, but I want to thank you for the work that you're doing. You make a difference every day, whether it's making the arts accessible, whether you are bolstering basic needs, whether you are restoring justice or promoting peace. I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for, I know that it's hard. I know that it can be difficult at times. It can seem like it's too much. I hope that this has given you some encouragement, some pathways to think about. I am open to discussing this with you separately as well, so feel free to reach out on LinkedIn. I'd love to talk with you more. But with that, Wendy, let's go to some questions.
Thank you so much, Cherian. That was a lot of fun. I love your very practical approaches to implementing all of these. So we have a few questions. If anyone wants to drop some more, we'll get to all of them. But I'm going to start with Danielle. She's just looking for clarification. If it's the average household gets 92 direct mail pieces from nonprofits, or that one nonprofit sends an average of 92 pieces per year?
It's the former.
Okay.
And you can follow up on that research directly so you can see that.
Awesome. Laura is wondering, is it always more successful to have an envelope rather than using a postcard in the mail?
Always is a tough act to kind of argue for. So there's no such thing as always in fundraising is my is my basic answer. What I would say is I believe in general multiple touch points are helpful because they may not see something or they may not remember that they saw something. There isn't any group of people, whether it's me and my partner, me and my kids, small groups of people where everyone remembers everything that was said or was asked of them. So when you get to larger situations like a household getting mail, it's really hard to remember stuff. So the more times you are financially able to and resource able to, like staff time to write those, I think generally the better without overdoing it. Kind of think about election campaigns. They send you stuff a lot, and it's because they want this person to be top of mind and create that name recognition. So I would say it does seem to work, and that, you know, people's way smarter than I am use that strategy, but it's really up to you on how to implement that.
We have an anonymous attendee saying that we've had to move to email appeals only with just small 100 to 200 size mailers. I'm planning on making follow-up calls to top donors to as many as possible after the first holiday appeal. Is this a good plan?
I would say, again, you know, if you're able to do multi-channel or omni-channel, it's super helpful, but you have to do what you can, right? And so the phone call piece is really an excellent strategy. Just start calling people, getting them on the phone. Even if you're leaving voicemails, again, it's going to prime, it's going to solidify that top of mind mentality for your donors. But when it comes to the tactics, you've really got to do what's best for you. I would say that a lot of people try to save money when it comes to direct mail. It's actually not that expensive, and it produces a higher than average return on investment. Remember that your open rates for emails are probably in the, you know, on average 20 to 30%. That's not a lot when it comes to overall the number of emails. And then people who say social media, well, your organic reach on social media is less than 1% in most cases, unless you're doing paid social. So it's really hard to get eyeballs on those things. Another tactical element just sort of rounds out the pieces there, but the phone call is another step in that process. I wanted to grab, Wendy, Judith's question in the chat about QR codes.
Mm-hmm.
I would say if your audience, if you know your audience is able to interact with QR codes, great. Don't make the mistake of sending a QR code over email. They can just follow a link. But in direct mail, QR codes can work. I would put both the QR code and the link just in case people don't understand what to do there. I feel like a lot of people are comfortable with QR codes just in the world that I deal with, but it continues to be pretty successful in the grand scheme of things. So I would say it doesn't hurt to do it.
Yeah, I agree. QR codes have made a great comeback since 2020.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, that looks like all of our questions. I want to thank all of our attendees so much for joining us today. When you hop off, there will be a quick survey. As Cherian mentioned, we want to know what you thought of this webinar, and for future content, you can help us really drive. So thank you so much. And Cherian, thank you so much for your time. This was a lot of fun. We always love having you.
My pleasure. Thanks so much, Wendy. Thank you all for being here. Have a good one.
Have a good day, everyone.